This,
I'm actually,
go on.
I'm actually an artist slash animator, so I just like to get my fingers in all the pies, do a bit of everything. So in the absence of Kareem, I think we're going to be giving the art dose.
Yeah, we were
of the
going to take you
today.
through a bit of our journey, actually, of arriving. This is why it's perfect that you're here. It's like a less professional version of your SIGGRAPH talk. Talking through kind of how we arrived at the loose engine, really, but more from an art perspective. And talking about some of...
Have you got some videos and stuff?
It's lots of images, so we're going to talk about.
Pictures.
So that's why, it'd be perfect to have
This would
you.
be like memory lane.
Yeah.
Yeah. Some of them I hadn't actually seen myself. Some really early stuff.
This is quite
Okay,
exciting.
so I'm gonna show you.
Right, Dent is on the
here.
PowerPoint action.
If I have this, so you can see which one we're talking about.
Okay, great.
Yeah. Okay.
Oh, is that on the stream right now?
Yeah.
Okay, so we thought we'd start with, these are actually the paintings of Kareem, the art director. And we're talking about the one on the right at the moment, aren't we?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Oh, the one next to it's coming up.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh,
okay. Yeah, so we thought we'd start with Kareem's vision for art in general, and having many conversations with him, he always would say the concept art for games is nearly always more interesting than the final game. Why don't we make something that looks like the concept art? So we thought we'd start with his actual traditional oil paintings,
yeah.
because actually all the artists on the art team, we're all traditional artists of some kind, aren't we? Or illustrators or painters or...
Yeah, one of my favourite things about working at Media Monaco is the craft room, where we get to do life drawing and splash paint about, experiment, looking at different media, and just sort of try stuff with traditional mediums.
Right, shall we go to the next one? So way back when, before we had the actual Splatty engine, we were creating the blob editor, as it was called back then, and that was capable of making very tight, beautiful sculptures, and this is one of Francis's sculptures. What's fascinating about this image is already at this point, even before we have the concept of splats, you can tell that Francis has made it. So we had that in from a very early.
Yeah, and I think I remember this when we were making this sort of stuff. Kareem and Francis especially were developing techniques. So like a lot of you guys probably think we already knew how Dream was going to pan out, and then when you guys get it or girls get it, you'll be like, ooh, Media Molecule had a plan from the beginning, but actually it's much more like we're discovering the tools as well. And so the first time you get hold of the blob editor as it was then, no one knew how to draw with it, and no one knew what the ways to do a sculpture like this. So Francis invented the sort of cutty style. What was the process?
Yeah. So what's interesting about this image here, I think, is that the approach is very sort of gestural and loose and sort of fluid, but the end result is quite a sort of rigid looking sort of like, I think the thing we wanted to achieve visually was how can we get that sense of sort of the energy and the splashing and the sort of mark making that you get from
Like a sketchbook.
from paint.
Have you got any of the Crystal's Dream stuff in here as well? Or
No, we've gone more.
We do.
We do.
We went more like conceptual stuff.
Fair enough.
But we can pull some
But
of
no,
that
it's just
maybe.
because there was a whole side quest narrative-wise where we built most of a game that was called Crystal's Dream.
Yeah, with Dad
While you're talking.
and Dad's
Yeah,
head.
so Tom and I actually did pull a ton of videos from the past of Dreams, so we can show some of those throughout the stream.
Cool.
Well,
We do have some stuff from that.
I don't want to side, but like I just saw that the next one coming up is quite loose suddenly.
Yes, so it's more of a, this is what we had before there was anything.
Yeah.
And then there's a few concepts lined up.
Yeah.
And that was kind of the shift in tone to, I remember this, if you go to the next one. So I painted this set of 9 concepts. I can't remember when that would have been, 2014 maybe?
Yeah.
And at that point, we didn't have the Splatty engine. But that did kick off conversations about painting something that was looser. How could we actually make that? but let's inspire ourselves first by making a bunch of concepts. So if you keep actually scrolling through the other concepts, so there's another one that I painted, and nearly always kind of doing some quite abstract things that we really probably could never do, but funnily enough now you could totally make something like this.
And these were all
in
printed
Dreams.
out physically on the walls, and so I'd like walk around to the tea point and be taunted by these beautiful colour studies. And it took me a long time to realise they weren't just colour studies, they were actually like, this is what the game should look like.
Yeah.
I joked in my talk at 2015 that Kareem would be like, Alex, can we make it look like this? And he'd point at either one of John or Francis or Kareem's paintings. And then I'd be like, oh, you mean actually like that, not just like inspired by that?
Yeah.
And that took me a long time to jump over that thing. Because at the same time, and maybe we'll see this when Abby and Tom show the Crystal's Dream stuff, while this story was going on, other bits of Media Molecule were working on other bits with very different visual style, because the engine that the rest of the team was working with was super tight, was super crisp.
Yeah.
And so we built this whole game, playable, well, somewhat playable game, called Crystal's Dream, that had a very different art style. So it was almost like you were pioneering what Dreams was going to become visually, because we weren't comfortable with where we were, but we
Yeah.
had to work with what we had. So it was really, it was mad.
I do remember one day as well, you and Simon turning up behind me and asking me, how would you make that in the game? And how would
Yeah,
you make
how
that, pointing at, because this is another concept I painted. So, like, I think that led to really interesting discussions. But if we come on to the next one, this is, again, a kind of step back. So this is not in order of time, but probably highlights what we were doing before this, which is, this is one of yours, isn't it? This is really early.
Yeah, so this is a stab at what it means to kind of make those concepts that you did in 3D. So we're trying to replicate those graphical 2D marks, but as a representing them as sort of 3D volumes.
In
Max, yes. Yeah, so
Do you have a video? This is from a
Yes,
video
that's it,
called A
unfortunately.
Painterly Philosophy.
Yeah, we didn't know you were going to be here, so we didn't really. We wanted to use images that we'd done
No, there's
rather than
these
speaking
images.
for.
These
it
images
does
are
come from
that
that,
video.
yeah, but
Yeah.
we didn't want to show the video.
Oh, you meanies. Well, next
Well, we were
time.
going to leave it for you. Maybe you could show that later.
Oh, okay. Well, anyway, there's a beautiful video, and I had that video like playing that these three stills are from daily. I just watch it and traumatise myself because it was like all volume rendered. And if you're a rendering
Yeah,
person,
but how long did it take to render?
Yeah, ages. That's why it was
You were saying
traumatic.
like each shot was like a weekend.
Yeah, astonishing.
It was horrible.
These
Yeah.
pretty sort of bad-looking renders.
They're not
when,
bad.
when compared to what we've got in real time in the engine running now, it's astonishing that one took like a weekend to render and the other
Yeah.
goes
And now it's
runs
all
at
real
6 days
time.
sort of thing.
But it's a cool video, so we should dig that out and play it. Maybe I'll
That'd
find
be really
it.
good.
Yeah, if you
Yeah.
find
Maybe-
it, send it up to us. We can.
Maybe
add it.
we can do this sometime in this talk, or
I know
or
where it is on the
following this.
network, so
That'd
I'll
be
go away
perfect.
in a minute and find it.
Well, no,
We'll
you
be
should-
here
you
till
should-
10.
Yeah, we should stay
Where
and
do I
show
put it on the network, Tom?
Just let me know.
All
Yeah.
right, I'll let you know.
Let's skip to the next one.
Yeah.
So this next image was to show the first way we were trying to create still with no splatty engine, but the idea of line was these were your.
Yeah, so a sense of sort of being able to influence the line with like pressure and speed, beginning to capture
Hand drawnness.
Yeah.
how do you say have the engine react to the speed of your input and like the flicks of your wrists, so you can see like with these drawings in particular, like the weight of the line is controlled with the pressure and the
But it's still a sculpt, isn't it?
It's still a sculpt, yeah.
Yeah. And then if we go to the next one, this is another one again of beautiful Francis drawing.
Yeah, so the same thing again, but instead of a CSG line, this is we spawn sort of rows of splats, and this maybe you can explain what splat is.
We always talk about CSGs for the longest. That won't mean anything to anybody else. We call them, everyone will know
Yeah,
them as
I mean,
sculpts. What does CSG actually stand for? I just say that.
Constructive solid geometry.
There you go.
There you go. But this is closer to the paint. What's it called in the game now? Paint.
It is paint now.
Paint.
Yeah. So we've used it, when you use Dreams, when you play the game, you'll discover there's basically two sort of key ways of making something, and you can either paint it or you can sculpt it, and you can use those things together, and that's when the real juice happens. But this was the sort of early test of what became painting.
And then if we go to the next one, another one of Francis's again.
Yeah, so the same technique, but like mixing different splats. So you can see like the figure is sort of like a pastel-y shape, and then I've sort of cell shaded with like an inky mark.
I've never seen that one
And then
before.
the dress is sort of like a wedge-shaped sort of calligraphy pen. But these are still two-dimensional.
Yeah, that's Photoshop, right? You did that.
No, this is in the game.
Oh, that's in the game?
Yeah.
Yeah.
There you go.
Stay alone.
So this one, I actually forgot I did this, but we called it the Splat Atlas. So all of the textures that made up our textures in the game when we finally did go to the Painterly engine, the first version of it, I actually got out some pen and ink and drew some of these and painted some of these and took photos of them and turned them into some of the images in our first Splat Atlas. But that changed several times throughout the years.
Yeah, I did.
It kind of honed in on, but back then all the styles were kind of similar, and Kareem very much turned it into each one had its own more discrete personality. So if we flip to the next one, so this is certainly not sequential, but this was back in the blob editor. It was actually one of the first things that I did with it, which was finding some studies that other artists had done and seeing if I could replicate that feel in the blob editor when we didn't have any splats.
You're literally modelling the splats.
It has a
aren't
very
you?
sort of modelling clay vibe. It looks like sort of, I don't know what the brand is in America, but Fimo will Sculpey
yeah.
all those sort of things. Yeah.
But I had also picked concepts that I thought were probably achievable to do, but we actually got quite far with that, and then that kind of took us down the rabbit hole, if you go to the next one, of trying to find something really loose, which is also it was really hard to achieve, but I was actually modelling the brush strokes at this point, so I was creating the brush strokes, and then obviously it's still very crude at this point, but then trying to assemble those brush strokes to create the little study. And it was getting a bit frustrating because there's only you can't lose edges like you would in a painting.
Yeah.
With a painting, a good painting, you're seeing edges, you're losing edges, you're looking at your darkest mark, your lightest mark. We could certainly do that, but when you're assembling lots of tight things, you're still going to have
So I mean,
lots
to
of
relate
tight
it
things.
to what you guys have got now, and also what you might have with another program like Blender or Max or Maya or something, what John and Francis were working with at this point was they could sculpt, but they could only sculpt single colours, pretty much.
Yeah.
And it was always hard. There was no softness to it, and it was very crisp. But it was almost like if you were modelling in Blender, it's like you're not allowed textures. You're not allowed anything sort of fancy. You can just make these sort of simple shapes. And they were like, oh, we really want art style to be painterly, but with this tool. And it was a real kind of tension because it was like, it really wasn't suited for that. And so, yeah, it was a real tour de force that you managed to make it look somewhat painterly.
Yeah, so this next few, again, is another study of another painting. And if you skip to the next one, this was more really getting into trying to mash together some really splatty sculpts. You can't quite see it on this screen because it's small for us, but and trying to make that quite abstract, quite cubist, I suppose.
And everyone was gravitating towards the messy parts, which is sort of hindsight now, we're seeing it obviously, but you know, the tight stuff was cool and everything, but it was when you were doing those weird abstract shapes coming out the back of the
Totally,
head.
and we knew that we'd be able to do that because everyone's been making games in that style for, forever. So it was like, what could we do that was different? That was exciting us as a bunch of traditional artists. The next image is really interesting. So this was this just when we got it?
Perhaps
early,
this might be a better thing for you to explain, Alex. But at this point, we're able to sort of turn the surface points of the tight meshes into splats.
Oh yeah, I'm just looking up close. Yeah, I did a bunch of prototypes. I mean, basically Simon Brown built the engine that you all have now, and he deserves a lot of the credit for where the engine is at. He's been doing it
and relentlessly
for the last 2 or 3 years. He's taken it from a bunch of messy prototypes to something that actually runs on your PlayStation really nicely. But at this point, I didn't have to worry about frame rate. I didn't have to worry about. I was just experimenting visually, and it was a really nice moment for a coder to have to think, I'm just going to try and think about what John and Francis and Kareem are trying to achieve visually. And the first thing I was into was like basically detonating the surface of the model, the type model, and just blowing it up, like blowing it into 1,000. I think it was like 50
It was
million.
Crystal's head, wasn't it? Do
Yeah,
you
it was
remember? And it
Crystal's
turned
head
into like
originally.
sand, and
So
it was
Crystal's head,
amazing.
Crystal was this. I really think we should dig out that Crystal video.
We have a crystal video.
Let's play.
Do we have the
Crystal
one
video.
turning into sand? Because
I
that
don't
was.
think we have that one, but I know
Let's
we
do
have
a
another
sidebar
one
on Crystal because I think that will actually help
All
the
right,
story.
crystal sidebar.
Sidebar, yeah.
I need to remember which one it is.
Well, while you're finding, I will
Oh.
finish the story. So I took Crystal, who was like the antithesis of this. She was like super cute, super simple, but it was like a sphere, a bit of blue, beautifully done by Francis in terms of character design, but in terms of like complexity and visual fluffiness, none of that. Just really simple shapes. And so I was like, right, I'm going to detonate Crystal into I think it was 50 million points, and then just perturb them. We started playing them with colour and movement, and I started putting waves through them. The sort of thing you might see in Houdini or those sort of programs. And that was, and suddenly Kareem was like, yes, that. And I was like, this is completely impractical on real time, but I'm just doing it anyway. And like Kareem's like, yes, and he sort of cheered me on to do this silly stuff. What's happening now? Is this the one?
Should be one.
I don't know what this video is.
We've got
So
a couple.
excitement. This is really early.
Turn to the imp there.
That's when the imp was Crystal.
Character.
2014.
Oh yeah, that's when the imp was crystal. So different one.
Oh, it's kind of cool though. I mean, you can see. You can
Oh,
meet,
that's when Crystal was a Subbuteo character.
Oh yeah.
yeah, but that's Crystal. So she has this blue hair and these buns. She was super cool. Everyone loved Crystal. But she was very simple. The style of
Oh,
Dreams
that
was sort of
Pete did that level.
Yeah.
moving into this kind of very simplistic kind of clay, simple shapes kind of vibe,
Dad's head.
which would have been a great game in itself. It's just not the direction we ended up going with. And so yeah, effectively most of the game team and the programming team were working with this engine day in, day out. And meanwhile the art department was like, let's buzz this all up. And so I was like, let's detonate Crystal and explode her into a... what else can you remember about this period?
I'm just looking at that, thinking Dreamiverse Dash has got a bit of that flavour to the when you're doing the platforming.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it does with them sort of measured
Yeah.
lines and everything.
And I think that may have been Pete actually doing that again. So there you go.
This version of
It
Dreams
lived.
in terms of collaboration was also really out there, which is that every dream was live edited everywhere, all the time.
Yeah, and you could jump into. I've totally forgotten that. You could jump into anyone's stream at any point.
So, for example, if Francis started changing Crystal's glasses just on his own, he had no idea that anyone else was playing the game. Her glasses would change live all across the
Yeah,
Dreamiverse.
but
Oh
you
my
had
God.
separate
Yeah.
you had separate undo stacks.
yeah,
So if somebody started messing with your stuff,
yeah.
you couldn't undo it.
It was confusing as hell. And so you'd be driving around in a driving level, and suddenly someone would edit a tree, and suddenly the tree was too big for the track, and you'd literally have to stand up in the office and go, "Who's changing the tree?" And it was amazing. You had a real sense of being in this like vibrant, living painting.
Yeah.
But the other side of it was impossible to get any work done. So then we added voice over IP chat, and we forgot that it was on all the time, and there was a review going on in one of our meeting rooms, but everyone in the office could hear it. So basically, you'd hear that people going, "Crystal looks a bit rubbish today," and they didn't realise that Francis was probably
Crying.
sitting there crying at his desk because he could hear everything that everyone said about Crystal. Like if they said it with Crystal in the level, then whoever was working on Crystal would hear it, and it was super chaos. It was chaos.
That live
That does sound
update.
like chaos.
yeah,
That
I mean,
live update thing though was cool because you could jump into somebody else's stream and spy on them and watch them
Yeah.
make.
So there was
That
no
was
publishing.
very
That is
cool
very
element.
cool.
We had to back away from this, but to give you an idea of how mental it was, there's no concept of publishing. Just everything you did was live all the time. You couldn't even
Wow.
save. So
And if the server went down,
then no one could work, and we
Yeah.
all just would
Yeah,
go
which
and play board
happened.
games. Yeah, but yeah, so it was like everyone in the entire Dreamiverse being in a massive Google Doc, all simultaneously
Yeah.
editing it, but it's art and gameplay, and so yeah, it was just bedlam. But it
Wow.
was fun. Not fun when we were trying to do an E3 build, and everyone was like, "Stop changing the level, stop working." Anyway, that's Crystal. Dreams could have looked like this, people. Which
Yeah.
would be cool, but
But
very
we didn't take
different.
anything away, right? 'Cause
No,
the game
you can
No,
still
you
build
can
it.
still
That is
do
very-
all of
that's
this. You
very
could build
true.
this in Dreams
Totally
now.
challenge.
So you go Back to your
yeah, back to the
art.
slides.
Right, so, but at the time I was like, oh, I'm so over this untextured look, which you can now do brilliantly. So go ahead, beautiful dreamers. But yeah, we sort of were like, right, let's blow this up, and we started doing this kind of point cloud craziness.
Which
it went-
looks like nothing else. I mean, you look at that image there, and you could think, well, that's just a piece of concept
Looks
art.
like Dreams is starting to be available in the US.
Oh,
my God.
Go
wow!
up on the US stores.
server
Hey!
programming. sweat.
Stressed Eric.
Do you need to go?
No, I don't want to see any of the grass that is firing on fire. Yeah, so then we start going. We've actually backed away a little bit. The super point clouds that was in this era, we had to slightly go a bit lower tech, but they're almost as good as these. These are like the creamiest.
And these are all
of creamy.
Francis's images again.
Yeah. So what's I think amazingly in this sequence of images, these are 3D now. They're not
Yeah.
arrangements of flat 2D splats. These are CSGs, and then I've sort of
Jittered them around.
jittered them around and combed them and sort of set their orientation.
Monkey
And then-
in a space helmet.
And there's a Pomeranian. Is that a pom? I don't know what.
Well, yeah, there's a bit of
It is
pom
amazing.
theme today, so maybe it's just
So
carrying on
cloud
from.
pom,
Yeah.
pomer poodle.
But that was we had like the brush direction, didn't we? But it was just all on sliders. So this
Yeah.
all of these
All on
experiments led to here's a contrived way of doing it. How do we make that fun?
Yeah.
So all of those sculpts that you made the dog with, I think you had to tweak its angle to
Yeah.
make it look like it was.
Oh, we don't have
moved.
the nice combing UI.
We didn't have any of
you
that.
could select the splat you wanted, and you'd have the sliders.
I think that's
spin
the
it
that's
around,
the other
spin
side
around.
of any kind of project development. And when you're making your own dreams as well, you'll find this. The process is so horrible and traumatic, and then you see the end result and you're like, wow, this is amazing. But like for example, Spider-Man, recent game, amazing, Insomniac, incredible team. But I don't know anything about its development, but I know for a fact that all of them during the process of making it have been going, oh my god, nightmare! Game development is so hard.
Yes.
And so, yeah, we got these beautiful results, and at the time we were like, wow, we've made it, dreams can make amazing results. But the process to get there was so mind-numbingly awful that it probably damaged you permanently. I don't know. Are you damaged?
Do you know what? I'd actually struggle to not use it now.
Okay.
Like go back to traditional tools would be.
Oh no, but at that point it was not a pleasant experience.
It
All
was.
the
I don't
sliders
know.
and-
Like the result was pleasurable.
Yeah.
Getting there was really not. And there's actually a good slide that we can talk about
Oh,
that's
cool.
coming up, which was a part of our E3 reveal. These are some paintings that I did when it was using the same tech, making things super. So we still didn't have the paint tool. This is actually still done with Dreams, with sculpts, but
yeah.
making them super loose. And what's interesting about these images, this one and another one, I didn't have a plan, so I just started putting down sculpts and just waited for something to appear, and then kept on adding until faces appeared.
Yeah.
But this was back when sculpt positions were not saved in each session. So if I quit out of that dream and went back in, that was it, it was gone.
Yeah.
Wow.
So this
Yeah.
lived for like, each one of these took me like an hour.
Yeah.
And it lived for an hour.
And actually, do you remember when I was around the time Emily and Maya joined, and characters had gone in, but you couldn't save them?
Yeah.
And so the
biped
whole
tool.
art team had like a character jam, and they made all these amazing characters.
It must have been like 100 or 150.
yeah, and
or
then they
something.
screenshotted them, printed them out, and then there was no save, and they were gone for good.
Yeah.
And it was just, but
It was quite liberating as
it
well, though,
was. It
because
was
you
like-
could just, try anything out.
Yeah.
That's the spin.
So this image, people might recognise from our E3 announce 2015. I did the set for this, and the reason why I show this one, those trees in the background were the precursor to actually getting our paint tool, because they look like paint strokes, but what that actually is a giant torus that I made really loose, and then I changed the combing to be 90 degrees to the world.
Oh,
So they're all loads and loads of gigantic strokes, and they
Yeah.
look like tree trunks.
And this is like, again,
another
you
point
couldn't
of-
save a lot of that stuff, could you?
No.
Just like sliders. So they had to literally open up a panel of mouse, sliders, and using a mouse, they had to dial in about 20 numbers until they got something artistic.
And they were
looking.
face me as well. So if you actually moved the camera, all those trees moved weirdly. But it led to, this is a really cool result.
How do we do
Can
this
we
properly?
get some
Yeah.
tech? And it led to Mark Adami writing the stroke tool.
And Mark Adami is downstairs right now programming, and I'm so happy to announce he just grabbed me and he's like, Alex, I've rounded the corners off the video tutorial player, and then we can ship the game now. It's done. I mean, like that is like round the corners on video player. Thank you, Mark. That is genius. Right. Anyway, sorry.
So back to this. This was Paris Games Week. This was the intro. So what was that? 2016 or was that still 2015? I
Some
forget.
blur of teams.
And
yeah.
that was it felt like a bit of a breakthrough for me personally, doing that scene where we had really loose sculpts. I don't think we still had the paint tool. I don't think we had
Still
the paint
didn't have it.
No.
This is all sculpts.
So that was still sculpts, but it felt like we were approaching our the concepts we had tight and loose in one scene, and that was, I don't think we were in too much in Sliderland at that point. I think we were moving away from it.
I think and this is where Anton Mikhailov
That's right, yeah.
as well. He was on board at that point, helping Kareem out and these guys out to actually implement a good feeling UI, and that's Anton's genius, was always bridging the artist to the I think the trendy word is UX now, isn't it? The user experience. But he was brilliant at realising those initial tools to not have to be in Sliderland, basically.
But I do remember this scene, and it sticks in my mind because it was really fun to make. It wasn't just a fun result, it was a fun thing to... So we realised, okay, the pain's been worth it, we're going on the right lines. And if we go to the next one, again, this is one of yours, Francis.
Yeah, this is a bit further on now. I think the good UI is in, and we're feeling really good about the engine. So we're sort of, the art team are soaring at this point. So I made some mossy rocks.
Did we have and an ice cream van?
Yeah, I don't know what that is, but it's sort of a cool contrast of the two things.
Didn't the Imp used to drive that?
Yeah, you can possess that. Not that one, because it doesn't have wheels, but there's a version of that ice cream van where you can.
Yeah, there's
This is a
there
dystopian
was a
ice cream
level
van.
0 version where the Imp drove, like, when I started, it was probably like 2 years ago.
Yeah.
Since we're around the sort of Paris Games Week E3 trailer, if you go back to our E3 trailer, which was all done in Dreams with sculpts, no paint, one of the things that we didn't realise was a problem until we made that video was that everything is a little bit transparent. Everything. So if you watch the sequence in the city with the space bike, I don't know what that
We're showing a bit of that
called.
later, actually.
All right,
some
well,
slides,
when you watch
some
that,
slides
watch
anyway.
carefully. Basically, as the space bike flies through the buildings, you can actually see it through the buildings. Basically, everything was a little bit transparent, which gave it a beautiful painty look. But it also meant that we couldn't do any so-called occlusion culling. We couldn't basically hit frame rate. We were doomed. Everything was going to be on fire. And so Simon had to come back from E3 and be like, well, it looks beautiful, but you build a tiny level and the frame rate dies. And so he had to add this new concept called hulls. We call them inner hulls. And basically inside all of your sculpts, Simon sticks a kind of, the claymation version is actually hiding underneath the fluffy version, and that claymation version is what's there to kind of block out everything behind it so that we don't have to draw everything, not make everything fluffy.
You're right, because I forget that cabin shot that we just had, that was done with that was the first scene I did with the hulls inside.
Yeah, with the inner hulls. Yeah. So and they were one of the key bits of tech. If we can ever persuade Simon to give a follow-up talk on what he did to the engine to take it from Alex Messyland to shipping Dreams today, a big part of it was all of these features like hulls, which
and then fuzzy hulls after that.
There's all sorts of technical, amazing shit he had to go through to basically make it look amazing without you trying. And the payoff of that was, when Kareem built a pirate ship out of individual planks, and then inside the hull of the pirate ship is like, the full deck and like multiple floors and bunk beds and stuff. And you can fly around the outside of that and it just looks like a simple asset and it runs at really good frame rate. But in the old engine, it would have been going, oh my God, I've got to render 400 layers of, slightly fluffy bunk beds and planks. And so it would have died. But thanks to Simon, everything's good. Thanks, Simon. Yeah, right, anyway, carrying on.
This was another one of yours as well.
Yeah, I think at this point the engine was sort of well established. Anton and the guys have figured out what the nicest ways of controlling the splats. We had a great library of splats, and here I'm just sort of you can sort of jump through the images quite quickly. I'm just exploring the possibilities of the splats, contrasting the looseness with tightness.
Yeah, I was going to say this one certainly. That was
huge splats,
totally at both ends. Really abstract. And this next one, I love that one.
Yeah.
Oh, it's beautiful.
Another
Tons of fun to
puppy
use.
looking down the train tracks.
And something more
Another
architectural.
one.
Another puppy. So many puppies. Oh yeah, here's the
So here,
the city that's all a bit transparent, which does look cool, but it does make your PS4 cry.
yeah. So again, that was trying to take on like something that's often quite cliche, trying to do it in a more painterly way. But I did that scene in a morning. I still remember it. It all came together really quickly. And
Yeah,
trying
cool.
to do something that looked like still a sci-fi painterly city, but something a bit different. And then in contrast to this one, which was, again, that was a background, a vista I made. And that is a combination of the strokes, and some of that is also sculpted. That was kind of, I think that was finally at the point where it was like, well, we can finally make
Good-looking
stuff
stuff.
that looks
Could
like
you still
concept
make
art.
that?
And looks
Because
great.
the engine has evolved slightly from there. Could you still make that sort of
You
stuff?
totally could now.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, cool.
Totally could. In fact, I'm pretty sure that's the current Splat Atlas
Okay,
as well.
cool.
And I think that's the last slide.
Wow, end of the story. That's the way you do
Yeah.
the wobbly.
Yeah.
So
So I don't know if you've got any
Have a look.
questions.
If anyone's got any
Else, we should show the Painted for Philosophy video.
Yeah, I know where it is on the network. If you want to,
yeah.
can you do that? Or do you want me to drive on a computer or something?
Yeah, if you want to drive on a computer.
All right. While you do some Q&A, I'll dredge up.
Sure, if anybody has questions for Francis or
Stand
John,
in
this
front
is
of
a
the camera.
great time to ask them. Excitingly, it's live in the US, so everybody can purchase it now. I don't know if it's up to purchase on browser or mobile yet, but it's definitely on the store.
What
so
time
if
is
you-
it there at the moment? East Coast, West Coast?
A little after 8 a.m.
Right.
Pacific.
Right.
So 11 Eastern. I
Exciting.
can do the rest of them. So yeah.
And do we have any other territories going live at different times?
That is it.
That is
like
it, the
we
last
are-
one.
It is out. Early access is out. Just terrifying and exciting. I know.
It still doesn't feel real for a lot of us that worked on it. Well, actually, it doesn't feel real for anyone that's worked on it, but certainly for having worked on it a long time, it still feels very strange.
Hasn't sunk in yet.
No, not at all.
Yeah, I think that it just might not. At some point.
Yeah.
We'll never sink.
That's kind of how I feel like, usually when this is like you think it's gonna be like a really big moment, and then you're like, okay, we just
Yeah, there it is.
now what I have to do changes and
Yeah.
yeah.
We are currently uploading the video.
Okay.
We're making a new scene in OBS,
see.
whatever.
Go on, Tom, you can do it.
Elite streamers and all that. Here it is. 2 seconds. Click OK.
It's also,
Can you switch the audio off of it? Because it's probably got some amazingly copyright track.
yeah, I remember what it was as well.
Do you?
Yeah.
What was it?
It was Zoetrope by Borders of Canada.
Okay, so if you want the full experience, everyone go to YouTube and load.
I'm pretty sure that's what it
Yeah,
was.
it was. Well remembered.
So it is up on YouTube also. The video.
This video.
Yeah. This
Is it
video.
really?
Yeah.
Oh,
That's
wow.
what Alex is saying. No,
No,
it's
the
not.
music. If you
Sorry.
want the full experience, you have to go and get the music off of Borders of
okay.
Canada, Zoetrope, and yeah. So this video.
Give
is
them the
one
hits.
That I watch this sort of daily to try and sort of remind myself of what we were trying to do. This is all effectively the art department making something in V-Ray. Was it? It was rendered in
Yeah,
V-Ray.
Max and V-Ray, yeah.
And
Kengo at this
and
point.
Kengo, yeah, Kengo Kuramoto. So, and I loved some of this stuff. It really reminded me of my demo scene days. So I was hooked, but I didn't know really how to achieve it when this video was made. But this is how we communicate a lot in Media Molecule. You can have a verbal fight and it can go nowhere, and eventually you're just like, look, this is going nowhere, and someone will then make a video or a song, or in the case of Mark Healy, a Commodore 64 game. There's an LBP story, which is that we couldn't decide whether Sackboy should face you or turn sideways. In the end, he did both. But Mark made a Commodore 64 version of that to demonstrate how it could work. And
Wow.
yeah, that was bizarre, but he won the argument that way, so it worked. So this video it's all based on volumetric renders, so fog clouds basically, into which is that how you did it? How do you do it, Francis?
Yes, it was a setting in V-Ray. It's very primitive. I'm the least technical person here, but yes, you can sculpt these meshes out of polys and max, and you can fill them with volume. I think that's why they take so long to render, and then put sort of noise through them to sort of get the sort of feeling of like looking like sort of brush marks. Yeah, that's sort of it.
And again,
Yeah,
that indirectly
compose
led to
scenes
with
out
fact
of
we
that.
have fog volumes in the game, and
Yeah,
you
we
can
do
pass
now.
noise through them, and you
Yeah.
can
Yeah.
animate that noise, and it's like all of these really early. These are Kareem's concepts. These really early ideas
Yeah.
were seen all the way through to the end, and it didn't take all weekend to render.
Yeah, but it was that thing of like I had a real mental block over what a game engine should be. I thought game engines were hard surface. I don't know why, but we all get so used to working in a certain way with polygons and everything else, and so it took a lot to snap me out of this mindset that
Yeah.
it would just be. I can't say out loud on stream what I called it. I had a very rude name for it. I knew that I didn't like it. I didn't know what to replace it with. So I was like, we're stuck in this world of rubbish. I'm making it more polite. Rubbish polygon engine world, and you know, that video was the one that sort
Yeah,
of
the T-shirt with your face on it.
I did the tyranny of the polygon, and so yeah, this painterly philosophy video. And what are these Photoshop paintings?
They
These-
are.
these
Yeah,
are-
I remember Kareem painting those the week I joined MM actually.
Yeah, and I was like, yeah, good on you guys for sticking to your guns, because one of the other things is like, when you're working in a team, you do want to compromise. You have to compromise. Sometimes you have to let people have another opinion, and you lot were a stubborn bunch and didn't compromise on that. So that was a lot of the reason that it took a long time.
But to be fair, I don't think I ever recall a time when any of the people on the engine team, yourself included, Simon, Anton, Mark Adami, no one ever said no.
I know that's a problem, isn't it? That's our problem. we need to add
But that
word.
was actually really inspiring. It was like, no, we can't do that. We would say, you'd ask us, do you want this or this? And we'd
Yeah.
always say we want both.
There were some things I said no to. So I don't know why, but I have a religious
Tom.
aversion to 2D post effects. So one of the suggestions that was made was like, Alex, if you're whinging so much about it being complicated and difficult and slow and all these things I was whinging about, why don't you just take the flat poly-ish engine that we have? It wasn't polys, but it was like in that style of crystal that you saw earlier, and just stick a 2D filter like you have in like an Instagram effect. It wasn't Instagram, but
Yeah.
those sort of 2D post effects. And I don't know why, but because that would probably work. And I think actually Don Williamson did some cool stuff with you on Fable.
Yep.
Was that a
Way
release
back when,
thing?
that never got released, but that was back in, I don't know, 2009 maybe?
Yeah, and so you were like, it does work, Alex. It does exist.
That
It
was
is a
really
thing.
slow though, even back then, but also the technology
Yeah,
wasn't ready for it.
But the thing that bugged me about it was it didn't feel like the paint strokes were in the world. They just felt like they were this 2D fakery after the thing. And you just want to be squinting at the screen all the time going, what's underneath? I don't want to see the paint strokes. So no, we're like, we've got to have legit paint strokes in the world. That's what it's got to be. And so we got there in the end. But anyway, yeah. Got our memories.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Thanks for that little narrative journey.
How are we doing for time?
We are fine on time. I believe that everybody's going to come up and eat some cake, and then also there's a whole bunch of people waiting over here
It's the quietest game
to
of
show
ping pong.
you
Yeah.
how they play ping pong at Media Molecule. Because
think-
why not? We're at hour whatever of this stream. It's just come out in the US. Cut to the ping pong camera.
There we go.
Good luck, everybody.